Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's actually really nice weather, so I didn't know how many people we'd see. I thought maybe people would be like hiking out and about, enjoying life, but we're thankful that you're all here with us tonight. My name is Kendra Cantrell. I'm the Director of Guidance here at Tantasqua, and I'm very thankful to have these wonderful folks right behind me participating in our 6th annual College Admissions Representative Panel presentation. I always feel like this event is so important and so critical because it's very rare that you have the opportunity to pick the brains of the admissions counselors, the people responsible for determining if your child gets into that school or not at the end of the day. They have a lot of insight, they have a lot of experience, and I know that even if your child is not applying to one of these 4 schools, they're going to get something out of this because the information they have for us can be applicable to all of the admission processes across the board. So I'm really excited to have them here tonight. So first I want to introduce everyone, and then we'll get right to some prepared questions. And then at the end, if we have some time, we'll do some questions from the audience if there's anything that's still lingering and burning in terms of a question. So first we have Mr. Stephen Dunn from the University of Connecticut. Steve is an admissions officer at UConn and also a UConn alum. In addition to working at UConn admissions for the last 13 years, he also worked in the admission offices of Syracuse University and Northeastern, and he has been a 15-year member of the New England Association for College Admission Counseling. He's a resident of Sturbridge and has 3 children in the district, 2 of which are in high school, 1 of which is a senior. So congratulations to you, Steve. You're on the journey with them. He's on the journey with you all. So if you're a little stressed, he's also a little stressed too. He's right there with you. Our next participant is Matthew Johnston from Clark University. He is the Senior Assistant Director there, and he did his bachelor's at the University of Chicago and worked there for 6 years in graduate admissions and student affairs. He's now a part-time MBA at Clark. He oversees admissions for East Asia, Southeast Asia, and transfer students, and lives a block away from his office in Worcester. Mr. Lucas always teases me about the Worcester Renaissance. He thinks it's like not a real thing. But it's a real thing, right, Matt? Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to tell him you said that. Our next participant is Michael Mazeka from Westfield State University. He's the Assistant Director of Admissions and a graduate of Westfield State for both his bachelor's and his master's degree. He's worked in admissions for 11 years, has been at Westfield for the last 9. At Westfield, his primary responsibilities include managing the communication and data for the office and assisting in the recruitment process for all levels. And finally, we have Audrey Smith from Smith College. It was named after her. No, just kidding. Did you have to have that last name to work there? Is that like a requirement?
It's my college.
It's your college, that's right. You get to make the rules. So Audrey is the Vice President for Enrollment at Smith College. She oversees the offices of Admissions, Student Financial Services, and the Registrar, and has over 30 years experience in college admission. Prior to her role at Smith, Ms. Smith was the Director of Admissions at both Hampshire College and the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. She's also on the board of the Coalition, for Access, Affordability, and Success, which hosts a platform of college advising tools and an application accepted by over 100 colleges. Audrey also serves on the board of the Private College 529 Plan and is well versed in regards to college saving plans, if you have any questions for her on that. So can we please give them a warm welcome? And also, Ms. Smith is related to someone very special here, Mr. Gregory Anderson, one of our fearless history teachers. So she might share some nuggets of information about him as we go on that he may or may not be aware you're sharing. We'll find out. All right, so let's get started. So, as I said, I have some prepared questions that kind of hit on the most important topics, the most kind of essential topics in terms of college application and admission. And then, again, if we have time for questions at the end, we will do that. So let's start with an overview of your particular school. So what factors for your institution go into an admissions decision? And can you please talk about the importance of fit between the student and the school? Who wants to start?
Maybe I'll start. First of all, Smith College is a women's college, so only half of the people in this room are even eligible to apply. But Smith is a private, small, residential liberal arts college for women. And like many of us, we attract many more well-qualified applicants than we have spaces in our class. We have an entering class of about 620 students. The most important factor that goes into any admissions decision is your academic record. And academic record is not just your GPA. It is an extensive look at the 4 years you've had in high school, the courses that you've selected, the performance in those courses, and the trajectory over time. When you're a small liberal arts college, you are fortunate to be able to read the entire application of all of the applicants, and there are many other factors that we consider, including the student's writing, the letters of recommendations from teachers and counselors, we can talk about that more later, as well as your extracurricular activities. For a residential college, that's really important. We're going to share a lot of things in common, so I don't want to take any more time. I'll pass the mic down.
Awesome. Good evening, everybody. So for Westfield State, we are a state university here in Massachusetts, and with all the state universities, I can say that with our admissions decisions, we all follow a sliding scale, which basically looks at GPA and SATs when we're determining whether or not a candidate would be eligible for admission. We do a recalculation of your GPA. We look at all 4 years of high school, and then we do a comparison with your SAT scores. And there's a specific scale that's set by the state, not only for the state institutions such as Bridgewater, Worcester, Framingham, but also another scale for the UMass schools here in the state. So when we're looking at an application, we're bound by that sliding scale. We certainly want to take a look at other things, letters of recommendation, college essay, to determine whether or not a student would be a good fit. But in the back of your mind, you always want to know that for the state universities and the UMass schools, we do have that sliding scale that we do have to pay attention to, and we do have to follow that as we're going through the admission process. And as we kind of go through, we'll talk a little bit more about recalculating GPA, kind of give you all an idea of how that works. But just to kind of keep that sliding scale in mind when you're thinking about state universities and the UMasses here in Massachusetts.
And we've talked about the sliding scale with your students for 4 years. We've included a copy of the sliding scale in their college planning packets for 4 years. It's in the senior packet if you want to look and see exactly where the numbers fall, where your child's GPA is, the test scores required, etc. So that's a good thing to remember if you don't kind of know where to go. Go to that packet, it'll be in there.
Clark is more similar to Smith than it is Westfield. Clark is more similar to Smith than it is Westfield. That being said, we do admit men and women and non-binary folks. But we are a holistic review school. And I would agree, sometimes we get students who think holistic review means that a great essay can save them from 4 years of mediocre performance, and that is not the case. But it is the case that every part of an application can matter. And another thing I would add is that if you're applying to a school that reads the law application, you don't need to repeat information across your application. So for example, if you're submitting a letter of recommendation from your chemistry teacher, maybe your essay should not be a story about chemistry class because there's likely to be overlap there. Whereas if you're applying to a school where different people might be seeing different parts of the application, you may need to think more strategically about which pieces of information are included in each part of it. In terms of fit, we're a small enough school and a weird enough school that we will take a chance on a student who maybe doesn't fit a usual academic profile, but seems like a really good fit at Clark. That is not the norm. Still, your academic profile is the single most important thing in an application, but we have been known to say, this is a student who wasn't a good fit for high school, but is a good fit for Clark, and take that risk there sometimes.
Hello, everyone. We look at about 7 or 8 different factors when determining when reviewing the application. Fit kind of is an overlying factor. Another word being holistic review that we consider. Number 1, we look at your school. Tantasqua High. We all know this is a good school, academically challenging, great staff, great faculty, and it's a school. Second thing we're looking at is your schedule. How competitive is your schedule versus what is offered at Tantasqua High School? Okay, have you challenged yourself with the curriculum that is available? Then third, we'll look at the grades, GPA. We will consider your GPA in relation to what classes have you taken. So for example, if you took straight college prep, that's a 3.0, fine. And if you took more, let's say, honors or AP classes, that GPA may be bumped up. So we look at the GPA in relation to your schedule. Then we'll look at your class rank, if it's provided. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but there's enough information on any school profile where we can figure out, okay, this student is in the top half of their class just based on the grade point average. Then we'll look at your test scores, SATs, ACTs. We'll get to that in a little bit. We'll look to see how well you did or didn't do. We will also look at your top scores from your math and verbal. And if anyone in here takes the ACT, we'll look at your overall scores there as well. Then we'll look at your essay. Most students, again, every school is different in what they ask in relation to their particular essays. Most are around a page or two. You don't have to go crazy with an essay. We don't want a autobiography. We'll talk a little bit more about the essay in a little bit. And then we'll look at your extracurriculars, whether that's part-time jobs, sports, student council, you name it, we'll look at it. Okay, you wrap all that up, and there's always a couple more factors that a student will lay into the application, and usually that's within the essay. We do read all the essays, every single one of them. So we will look for little things in the essay to make you pop out and stand out from the rest of the applicants.
Excellent, thank you. So a few of you mentioned GPA, and I know that some kids kind of get stuck on that number as if it's going to determine their future. And it seems like what you're all saying is that GPA does certainly play a part, but that it's not the be-all, end-all. And there are other pieces in that application that matter, maybe not just as much, or maybe, for each individual school, maybe they do. Let's talk about GPA just a little bit more specifically. We are on a weighted 4.0 scale, which is the scale that the state universities and UMass system uses, meaning that an A in a CPA class is worth a standard level of points, and then honors is worth a little more GPA points, and AP is worth more than that. So that's what it means by weighted 4.0 scale. Can you guys talk about the recalculation of GPA? Do you take the student's GPA here and break it apart and put it back together to fit your school's criteria?
At UConn, we did not. At Syracuse, we didn't really do that. At Northeastern, for a couple of years, we absolutely did that. The philosophy of the office at the time was to break everything down and put it on a 4.0 scale. And we had our own way of using the honors and AP classes to adjust everything based on a 4.0 scale. Meaning, even if you took 10 AP classes, your GPA would really could only come out to a 4.5 or whatever. So some schools have a 6.0 scale, some have a 10.0 scale. But overall, we will use the grade point average, which is provided on your transcript from the guidance office.
We don't really care about the GPA per se, so we don't have a special formula for recalculating it, and we're generally not looking at the GPA as an isolated number. We're looking at the entire transcript. So the basic answer is no.
We will look at recalculating GPA. It's helpful that you're already on the weighted 4.0 scale, so your GPA at Westfield won't be too much different from what it is here at the school. But it's one of our requirements that we do break down everybody's GPA, kind of take out some of the courses that I don't know you'd want to count, like health or fitness, phys ed or anything like that. And we make sure that we recalculate it and come back to the 4.0 scale. But generally, it's going to be recalculated and come out very similar to how you would have it here at Tantasqua. The reason we do it, though, is because not all schools are as great as Tantasqua. By just putting it on that weighted 4.0 scale, as Steve mentioned, there's some schools that have a 6.0, 7.0. I think there's one school that still has a 12.0. So we do have to do it kind of in our own way, and that's more of a state requirement. But we will take a look at everything and count everything that we possibly can in your GPA.
So like Clark, Smith doesn't recalculate GPAs, but I want to take a second just to talk about why you either do or you don't, or where it comes from. So in our entry class at Smith this year, we had students from 46 U.S. states and 54 other countries. So you can imagine the range of academic systems. And what you're hearing from all of us is a deep commitment to understand each and every applicant in the context of their high school setting and the opportunities in those classes. And so again, we know well that Tantasqua does this well, and I have the added benefit when I'm reading a Tantasqua application of having the inside gossip on some of your teachers who are recommenders. But really what we do is we know, we want to understand the context of each institution that the students are coming from. So one of the most important tools in doing that, and you should take a look at it, is the high school profile. Because that's going to tell us, it's going to explain that GPA scale and how it's done and whether you weight your honors and AP courses, etc. And it's also going to talk about the community, the range of communities, in this case with the 5 towns. It's going to talk about the colleges that students have gone to, and some of them even show a range of grades for the junior year classes. So that's how we understand all of this. And the question is, what's the easiest tool for the people reading the application to ensure that they're giving all of their applicants a fair and consistent read? For us, we're demanding a very high level of performance. Students have to be pretty near the top of the class. And so recalculating the GPA was just not the most efficient way to get at this important information for Smith.
And the school profile is in my office. We're working on next year's right now, so I only have last year's available, but we're certainly transparent about that. So if anybody wants to see it, they can hop down and give you a copy, no problem. The next question I have kind of talks about that trajectory, that academic trajectory that was mentioned. Kind of the idea that maybe if you didn't start off very strong, you're kind of moving in some forward momentum and showing growth and increased success as the years go on. What would you say, in terms of weighting all 4 years equally, or do you kind of look for more that trajectory? That's more the important piece for you, and they don't have to be stellar from day one when they walked in the building at 15 years old.
How many people in this room are seniors? Okay, all right. Don't take your foot off the gas. It's really important. So for Smith, and I think for most of us, it's going to be important. We're going to look at that whole trajectory, but the junior year is a full, complete year that we can really look at, and then we're going to look at that either first, depending if you've applied early decision or if you're applying regular decision, the first, you're on the block schedule, but that first semester or trimester, whatever it is for the schools, and how you've done there. And then, if you're offered admission, one of the conditions of admission is going to be that you complete your high school program with the same program at the same level of achievement. So that's the don't take your foot off the gas. Sometimes you have a bump in the road. Something goes wrong. It might happen in your freshman year, it might happen in your junior year. Then what we need to know is, are you back on track? And how can we be assured that you'll stay on track when you're in college?
So, we do look at all 4 years equally at Westfield. So the one thing that I always like to say is that, a bad grade or a bad year does not necessarily sink the ship. 3 bad years and then you're just trying to turn it on your senior year, it's not going to work out all that great. But if you maybe had a rough first year, maybe a couple classes didn't go your way, maybe your sophomore year biology class was just not your thing, it happens to all of us. We all have those classes in high school that we just don't excel at. So don't think that, oh my God, I had to get straight A's in every class all the way going backwards. You want to make sure that you're doing as well as you can moving forwards. And first quarter grades is also another opportunity to show us that you're still keeping up with your studies or you're improving on your studies from maybe your first year. To see 3 straight years of growth after a rough first year, or maybe, as Audrey said, something happened in your sophomore year that kind of hit a snag. Maybe it was something, life happens to all of us, and that's also important to include in your application. Let us know maybe what that was, so we can take that as a mitigating factor. But one bad year, one bad class, not going to sink your GPA. It's not going to sink your chances of admission to a college.
Yes, certainly your grades become more important as you go along. Certainly junior year grades are more important to us than freshman year grades. I'll also add to a point about keeping your senior grades consistent or better than your earlier grades. I read transfer applications, and almost none of those students planned to transfer. And they're settling in a situation where we have their full high school transcript, and they were planning to apply to college with just 3 years of high school transcript. Similarly, students are sometimes in the situation where they're asking for a change in scholarship, or they're asking for some other type of special consideration. Those types of conversations typically take place in spring of your senior year. So those are two of many reasons that you may not realize that your senior year is important because you're applying without all of those grades in, but it can become very important due to unforeseen circumstances.
If you don't do well in your junior year in one or two classes, the essay is a great opportunity for you to address that and acknowledge it. Put an explanation along with that C or whatever it was that you got in your junior year. If you're looking to apply to a competitive institution, I would say that for any of the schools out there, address it in your essay. Don't make a big deal of it, but here's what happened, here's how I moved on, and here's what I'm doing the first semester of my senior year, or first quarter, however, whatever is available to the students in October and November. That way you are taking care of putting in the mind of the admission staff, or whatever school you're applying to, why did they not do well in a specific class? Why the decline? To answer the question bluntly, we absolutely look at, is there an increase in academic competitiveness in this student? And we hope, as everybody's alluded to, we hope it continues in the senior year, because we all require your final high school transcript when you graduate.
And sometimes counselors get a little bit of flack for pushing your students to be rigorous throughout the senior year. It really is because of exactly what they're saying right here. We want to show growth, we want to show challenge all the way through to June. If students are trying to go back and get a more competitive financial aid package, it's nice to be able to say, here's all the courses I took throughout the year, and here's how well I did in my second semester. So we really do want them to push themselves all the way till the end. You can't take underwater basket weaving, for an entire day. So my final question about the rigor of transcript comes down to AP courses, honors courses. I don't know why that did that. There we go. Do you feel that it's better to take an AP class and get a B as opposed to staying in an honors or CPA class where they're kind of assured an A? Also, kind of along that line, maybe they're not super strong in math or foreign language. Should they kind of take that next sequence of course to really push themselves and challenge themselves, even if there's the possibility it may not go amazingly for them? Can you kind of speak to that?
Sure. Just a quick show of hands. Are there any juniors in here? Okay, all seniors. Okay, so pretty much your schedules are set, with the exception for if there's a last-minute emergency in the second half of your senior year. Okay, that also can be addressed by guidance, and there's ways to address that. So pretty much your schedules are set. So now it's a guessing game of, should I have taken that college prep class and gotten the A, or the honors or AP class, and here we are at 1 a.m, the dining room table, or sitting on your bed trying to cram in the last bit of information into your brain before the AP test the following morning. Who's been there? Just the other day. Okay. I know there's more. I know there's more.
I feel like that story sounds pretty personal, Mr. Dunn. I don't know.
So with that said, the academic weight will That adds to your strength of schedule, which is computed in the class rank. The academic competitiveness of your schedule counts. Now, an F is still an F. Doesn't matter what class it is. F is still an F. A D is still a D. Now, at a previous institution, where even if guidance did not recalculate the grade point average, we would recalculate the grade point average and add 0.3 for an honors class or 0.5 or 10 to an AP class. So we would raise the grade in a recalculated grade point average. But guidance takes care of that for you, and they put into play the strength of the curriculum when they compute the grade point average.
Yeah, so for the most part, you've already made this decision, and you hope it's the right decision. What you haven't done yet, though, is presented this decision. So I would encourage you, when you're interviewing or when you're putting together your application, to think about how to present the choices you make and explain the reasoning why. So if you chose to take the lower level class because you were really interested in a sport or a club or something else, tell us about that something else as well. The classes are set, but you still have time to tell your story about why you chose those particular classes.
Excellent. Ditto, ditto. Perfect. All right, let's move on to our least favorite topic, standardized testing. There's a lot of students who just get anxious with the word standardized testing. Maybe they don't test well. They're worried that what they've scored is just not competitive enough. It's not meeting the averages. How much does testing play into your admissions process? And what do you say to a kid who isn't a great tester?
First of all, over 30 years in college admission, and what I really want to do is lower the flame. It's gotten more and more anxiety, and anything that we can all do to lower the flame about this process would be great. There's going to be joy and there's going to be disappointments in this process. I'm going to say that if you're not a good test taker, find the schools that are test optional, and they run the spectrum. Smith has been test optional since 2006. We're quite a selective school. The University of Chicago, your alma mater, announced this year that they have become test optional. So there are schools throughout the range of schools in the United States that are test optional. Why do schools choose to be test optional? Again, the word you're going to learn to hate, holistic. If you're reading the whole application, there are schools that feel that they can make these decisions in the absence of a standardized test because none of us offer a standardized education. We offer a personal education. Again, different admissions philosophies, and some places use them. Although Smith is test optional, 76% of our applicants last year provided standardized tests for us. That sort of represented, I guess, the schools that we overlap with for students. But more and more places are becoming test optional, and it's APs. I think that's the other thing I would really like to say. It's the only thing that you can sort of compare across the globe, and I think that's why people put so much weight on it, when in fact it has as much context as the thousands of high schools in this country. There's a lot of research that will show the most significant correlation with SAT scores is family income. And that's not what we're choosing for when we're assembling a class in our colleges.
So as a state university, or one of the state few that still kind of uses that, we do have to follow the sliding scale. We do have to use standardized testing. It's not my favorite part of the job by any means. But the one thing I'd like to say is that you don't want to start comparing yourself to your neighbor or your best friend or anything like that. 20 years later, nobody cares what your SAT scores were. They really don't. So you want to make sure that if you're taking the SATs or the ACTs, that you do as well as you possibly can. And if you can take it more than once, we super score. So we'll take your best math and your best evidence-based reading and writing section. If you feel that the SATs are not working for you, try the ACTs. We'll take whichever one is better. And by the way, if you haven't taken them just yet, we don't require the essay portion, so you can save yourself the time on that. I don't know if they encourage you to do that.
We encourage them to take the essay.
All right, then never mind.
Okay,
Make sure
don't
you take
listen
the
to him
essay.
on that.
Required across the board. Every college wants to.
Thank you, that's right. Need him to say that.
So, you know, we will look at it, and it is part of our admission process. But at the same time, when you're looking at the state universities, we do actually have kind of a 10% rule in our incoming class that we're allowed to make exemptions for. So if you don't quite meet the sliding scale, but you're like maybe 10, 20, even 50 points off, it's not the end of the world, because we still have that flexibility to look at the other parts of your application and maybe make that decision to say, hey, let's take a chance on this person. But really, try not to give yourself anxiety. I know that's really, really hard to do when you're taking a test like this. But also, don't start comparing yourself, because it's going to drive you crazy. Make sure you do as well as you can when you take them, and then you kind of let the chips fall where they may.
Clark is test optional.
Lucky. SATs, horrible way to start everyone. Just god awful. Same with ACTs, it's god awful. Waking up that early to sit in a class or a cafeteria where they barely give you any breaks, it's horrendous. Anyway, take the test more than once. I encourage that, even if, well, not if you got a 1600, but if you did fair, if you think you can do better, take it again. And here's why. You never know what 10 points can do. 10 points on an SAT, it could be one question. And it could be the difference between getting admitted, not getting admitted. For a state school like UConn, where we have, this is more for the Connecticut students, but we have 5 campuses. So it could mean everybody wants to go to Storrs, Connecticut, where the main campus is. But 10 points could mean you're not going to get Storrs. You are going to get Hartford campus, which is non-residential, and it's for a much different population than what most students are looking for. It's required at UConn for students to complete a standardized test score, okay? And a lot of time, I've seen this at some of the other schools I've worked at, where it's 10 points could mean, it's a way to compare students. It really is, because if we recalculate everybody's grade point after trying to put your curriculum on a 4.0 scale, now we have thousands of students who have 4.0s. Now we have thousands of students who have 3.9, 3.8, and so on. Now we're going to look at the structure of the SATs, and we'll break that down. Okay, and at some point, there comes a point where there's a line in the sand where we cannot admit any more students. Fast forward to March and April, financial aid season. I've seen 10 points be on an SAT be a determining factor for not getting an academic scholarship of $10,000. 10 points. Okay, so for you students who just think, okay, I did okay, I'm going to take it once, you never know. Give it another shot. There are resources here in this school where you can go to guidance, you can work with guidance, you can work with other resources here to take practice tests. And I highly encourage you to do that.
So again, you can see a wide range of school kind of theories and approaches to standardized testing. With the state universities, they're a little bit more rigidly connected to the importance of scores. With schools like Clark and Smith, it's more, again, that holistic approach to the application. And fairtest.org has a nice list of schools that are test optional, so you may want to visit that if your student is not a wonderful test taker, or maybe they want to look at schools where that's really not the focus and they're thinking about other pieces of the application that are more critical to them. Let's talk about one of those other pieces of the application that's not testing, the essay. As a former English teacher, this is kind of my passion in the college application process. I really love working with students on their essays. I went to a college panel this morning with Georgetown, Duke, Harvard, Stanford, and Penn, and I asked them, I said, what was your most memorable essay topic that you read in this most recent admissions season last year? And I was struck by some of their answers. Georgetown, the rep said, the most amazing essay she read was a story about a girl who lived in New Hampshire and how she would farm for maple syrup. Again, sounds very kind of mundane, perhaps, But she said that the picture that she painted and the story she painted really put her there with that student, walking through the woods, tapping the trees, and it made such an impression on her that was the essay that stood out the most. So I think sometimes students feel like they have to write about the most exciting or the most tragic or the most horrible moment or the best moment. It doesn't have to be the highest high and the lowest low that you write about. I think what I have found over the years is that the most mundane and simple of topics done well can be the most impactful. What do you guys think about the essay?
Yes, that is true. I strongly recommend you put yourself in our shoes. I read about 20 essays in one sitting, and you need to have that experience. So offer to proofread your friend's essays or get some samples, put your draft at the bottom of that pile, and see how it reads. You will notice there are a lot of cliches to college essays, and you'll write a different essay after you've had that experience. You do not need to write a tragic essay. You do not need to write an exciting essay. You definitely don't need to write the big game essay. We've all read that already. The big game essay, it starts in the big game. You're on the free throw line, or the high dive, or the 20-yard line. You flash back to how you got there. Your grandmother told you when you were in kindergarten you would be a great baseball player. And in the last paragraph, you find out how the big game turned out. You usually win. Sometimes you lose. You always learn a life lesson. We've read that essay. Definitely my favorite essays every year are about topics that you wouldn't see in a newspaper, but tell me a story about you. It doesn't have to be something that at the outset seems exciting.
Proofread.
I feel like you said it all with that. How do you follow that up?
Take your essays to your English teachers, to your guidance counselors, and just have them give it a glance. Proofread. And everything he said is true.
I'm going to just add to the proofreading. Proofreading is excellent, and having somebody else read it is excellent. But students, this is your essay. It is your topic. It is your voice. Parents, your voice sucks the life out of essays. And we know it.
She's bringing the tough love. I love it. I love it. But you're right. You know, we can tell when a parent has had their hands on an essay a little too firmly, and that child's voice gets lost, and it only does a disservice to your child in the application process. So I think that's a very good point as well. Let's move on to the letters of recommendation, because that's another big piece of the process. What teachers should students be looking to talk to write their letter of recommendation? And then what are you looking to glean from those letters? What are the most impactful things that a teacher could say about a child that would really help you figure out that they're the right fit for your school?
Don't ask Mr. Anderson. So the purpose of the counselor recommendation is to put your application in context and help us understand Tantasqua as well as you in the context of Tantasqua. The purpose of the teacher recommendation is to understand who you are in the classroom, how you learn, and interestingly, sometimes I find what's most valuable is how do you respond to challenges or things that were really difficult. And so if you're somebody who may have struggled somewhat in a course, don't shy away from asking that teacher if you are confident that you gave it your very best effort in that course. And again, the teachers who are writing the recommendation, we really encourage them not to tell us about them, but to tell us about you. We're really interested in understanding how you operate in the classroom, what kind of a learner, what kind of a contributor you are. So you should be thinking about the classes in which you are most engaged. You probably, if you're applying to a liberal arts college, want to think about one humanities teacher and one more quantitatively oriented science or mathematics teacher to write those recommendations. And you want to figure out who you're going to ask now, not right before Thanksgiving vacation.
Just to kind of add to that, you know, it's helpful for us with these letters of recommendation to just get a different perspective than what's on your transcript. So, you know, your transcript's going to tell the story of how you fared academically, what did you do on tests, how did you do on projects, But the letter of recommendation for a specific class is going to tell us specifically how were you in that class. And if you ask a teacher who you were actively engaged in, they will probably have some really good things and some really insightful things to say as part of your letter of recommendation. And that is certainly helpful to us in the admission process because it speaks to the type of learner that you're going to be when you come to Westfield or Smith or Clark or UConn. So it's nice to have that extra insight as to who you are. I do recommend picking teachers that you do have some sort of relationship with so they can get some kind of specific details in there. You know, if you have a teacher who you was a favorite teacher and they really engaged with you and you really had a great rapport with them, that's going to be the best type of letter than going to get another teacher who you barely talk to, you don't participate so much in class, and they don't know you as well as some of the other students. So getting those professors teachers who you really know, that really makes a difference, and you can see that in the letter.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I think the most common mistake is automatically assuming the teacher who gave you the highest grade in the hardest class is the best referee. A letter that just says, I gave her an A in this hard class is literally useless. I have your transcript. I know you got an A in that hard class. I second the recommendation not to rule out a teacher who gave you a lower grade if that teacher can tell stories about you and tell stories about how you never mastered it, that you didn't take the easy way out, you didn't switch into an easier class. Those are often my favorite letters in a given year.
Ditto. I will say this. Sorry. If the teacher recommended, if you have very little relationship with the teacher that you're asking to write a recommendation for, it'll shut. It'll be a bland, generic recommendation that they have stacked away somewhere. But as Matt said, if you have some sort of relationship with a teacher and you've gone maybe after class or after school and asked an extra question, and you participate in those classes and there's some engagement there, those are the teachers that are going to reward you for that in their recommendation.
I think another layer to it in the counselor letter is that's a wonderful place to talk about personal struggles, academic struggles, give the life context that might be able to explain a bump in the road in the transcript. I think what I heard today from the other admissions counselors I met with, and I'm wondering if you're echoing this thought, is to write about the horrible personal experiences in your essay. Perhaps is not necessary. Perhaps allow the counselor letter to take that, to cover that, or maybe put it into additional information. Does that kind of gel more with your thoughts, or do you feel like the essay is the appropriate place to talk about those grander personal circumstances? I know that's a little tough question, but.
Yeah, I would say if a specific struggle or whatever, if that defines you and you want to write about it, then go ahead. If it doesn't define you and you don't want to draw too much attention to it, the additional information and the guidance recommendation are perfect opportunities to address that.
Yeah, for clerk, I would tend to shy away from using your essay for that type of story because we get a lot of essays about that type of story. I would tend to use additional information. One other thing I would say is it's a bad situation when there's something in the counselor letter that you haven't told us about. So, for example, if you've gotten in trouble, that's not necessarily a barrier to going to college. It almost never is a barrier to going to college. But if the counselor tells us about it and you don't mention it, that makes us worry, often much more than the incident itself.
And we don't talk about any disciplinary issues with students, just as a policy, so.
But you have to answer the question in the application when you ever submit
Yes,
it.
correct. So let's move on to extracurriculars, community service, work, summer programs. How do those play into admissions decisions for your schools?
So they're very important for us at Smith. We're really interested in students who are involved in the classroom and outside of the classroom. That said, what we're interested in is an involvement, not what that involvement should be. And so many years ago, actually, when I worked at Stevens, there was an article in the New York Times that said schools were really looking for fencers. And all of a sudden, everybody in the New York metropolitan area took up fencing. Not the way to go about it. What we're looking for in this holistic review, as I said, the word you're going to come to hate is authenticity. We want to get to know who you are and what your interests are. And for some students, that may mean one activity that you're very, very deeply involved in. For other students, that may mean a range of activities. And for some students, that may mean bouncing around and trying one thing and not doing another. Sometimes that makes us worry about a lack of commitment. So if you have tried something and decided it wasn't for you, tried something else and decided it wasn't for you, you need to really frame that story for us so we can understand why you made those choices. The other thing is involvement can be at school, it can be in the community, and it can be that you have a personal situation that says, I have to go home and take care of this family business, disabled relative, or whatever it is. So it is not necessarily what the activity is, just that that you're demonstrating that there are things that you're involved in outside of the classroom.
And I'll add too to that, I don't necessarily try to balance, extracurricular is better than community service, but it's not as good as a part-time job or anything like that. Showing that you've done something kind of outside of the classroom is really just important. I personally worked in high school, so I didn't really have any extracurricular activities. So I understand that there's a lot of students out there to afford college. They're going to have a part-time job and maybe can't take up fencing. That's just what I'm going with. But if fencing's definitely your thing, then that is something you want to highlight on your application. So don't feel like you have to do community service just because you think we want to see community service on your application. Do community service because you want to do something different. You want to be a part of something special. You want to help your community. Don't think you have to do volleyball just because we want to see volleyball on your application. Do things that are of interest to you and show that you have done something more than just go to class while you're here at Tantasqua.
I agree with all of that. One thing I'd add is that we're pretty savvy readers of these lists. I don't read for this school, but I know of my schools. For instance, the students always brag to one school about the service they did in Cambodia. But I know that trip, and I know the students don't organize it. The school organizes it, and they pays for it. And so I'm not impressed by that. So just be sure that it is authentic, and keep in mind that we've been around the block before. And so talk about what's actually important to you. Don't try to make something sound of inflated importance.
Fortnite is not an extracurricular activity. As much time as some of you spend on it, or other games. If you work at GameStop, that is worth putting down. But showing and illustrating your proficiency in something like that is not recommended. Extracurriculars, etc., are incredibly important. And as the others have said, showing your demonstrated commitment. I know there's a few of you in here that do show choir, and I never really gave it much thought until I heard how many hours are put into that one organization in the school and others, and students love it, and you guys do a great job, and that showing your level of commitment to that amount of time for the school and for an activity is worth mentioning. Okay, everything else you do, part-time jobs, sports, student council, etc., as I said earlier, that is important. However, it is not as important as good grades. Okay, so when the extracurriculars, this is where that delicate balance occurs in every house. You can't beat good grades. Okay, so as said earlier, don't take your foot off the brake, but don't let senior year bring your grades down, because we will see it in June.
So I think we've covered kind of the main pieces of the application. So let's move on to timelines and application timelines. So early action, early decisions, obviously when you're applying earlier, usually November 1, November 15th, December 1. Early action is non-binding, early decision is binding, which means if you get accepted to that school, barring any financial considerations, you're attending that one school. Can you talk about if your processes differ in terms of admission between early action, early decision, and regular decision, which is January, February, etc.?
So Smith has a binding early decision program and a regular decision program. We don't have early action. And the reading process and the expectation for the processes are exactly the same. You know, they're read by 2 different admission officers, the comprehensive review. Here are the differences. Smith is very generous with financial aid, and we meet the full demonstrated need of every single student who applies for admission. So if you do apply on our binding early decision, you're going to get the same financial aid award that you would get if you applied under regular decision. As was just mentioned, if you disagree with our needs analysis and you say this is not possible, we will release you from that binding commitment and you can apply to other schools. But the point is, there's not going to be any difference in our financial aid award. Here's what's going to be different about our decision. We take, on the margins, we take need into consideration. At the early decision stage, we've got plenty of money in the financial aid budget. And we really like the fact that students who are well qualified are applying and committing to come to Smith. So your chances of being offered admission are greater if you apply early decision. That said, you then have to withdraw all of your other applications. So if you're not sure it's your first choice, you don't want to enhance your chances because you're not going to get to find out about the other institutions. And if you're really wanting to compare financial aid awards that include merit-based money, you're not going to be able to do that. So early decision is for the student that has decided that the school is his or her first choice. And if admitted, you're going to let go of all of those other equally potentially good choices for you because you really did have a genuine first choice college. Sadly, more and more students are using it as a way to sort of manipulate the odds at highly selective colleges, and that's unfortunate, in my opinion.
So at Westfield, we don't do early decision or early action, but we still encourage you to apply early because we actually do turn our decisions around pretty quickly. So if you were to complete your application by the end of November, good chance you're going to hear back before the end of December. So even though we don't have a traditional early action, it's still to your benefit to get your application in early. And it's good to get it in early at most of your schools because oftentimes that's when schools are awarding scholarships. They award it to their earlier applicants. Maybe a major that you're looking at as a competitive major. For us at Westfield Nursing, we stop our decisions or stop accepting applications by February 1. So you have to get your application in before that. So regardless of whether you're applying early action, regular decision, early decision, you still want to get your application in early. And if for no other reason, it is just a stress reliever for you. The faster you get those in, the more that you have those done, the less you have to worry about it. You really want to get to your December break right after the holidays and just be able to kind of enjoy that break before the start of the year comes up. You don't want to have to be running around trying to get letters of recommendation last minute or get that last application in. Earlier is always better.
Clark has all 3 flavors. It doesn't matter to me as a reader which one you use, so you just make the choice for your own schedule. I agree, it's unfortunate. We used to see early action as the place you use for your top 2 or 3 picks. If you got into them and the finances worked out, you were done. And now we're seeing students do 10, 15 schools early, and there's no longer any benefit in terms of saving you time and stress. So I would encourage you not to get into that arms race. But it doesn't matter to me as a reader which cycle you choose.
I may go off here on a little tangent.
Keep it to a 10 minutes, 10-minute break. Okay.
All right, so UConn and the other schools I've worked at, we do not have early action, early decision, et cetera. We just do, we have it set up a little bit differently than Mike, and you may hear a term called rolling admissions, meaning when you apply, there's a certain amount of time that the admissions office will take to review the application and then kick back a decision. You may deny or something else, okay? Early decision was already explained. We have an application deadline of, I think it's December 15th, I should know this, but December 15th, I think we'll say, or January 1. You have to get your application materials into us by then. At that point, our readers will do their thing and compile and review the application, and then we will let everybody know at once the decision at the end of February, beginning of March. And we'll just send out 30,000 decisions at once. admit, deny, whatever. Okay, sorry, Ellie. So that's one way of doing it. Now, I'm going to pick on a couple of people here that I don't know. Okay, so you have a Kentucky hat. Okay, who is that? Okay, can you just stand up for a second?
Oh, sure.
Okay, no offense. Okay, so do you like Kentucky?
I like basketball.
Okay, basketball. Okay, so I'm going to use you as an example, and then I'm going to use you, Georgetown, as an example. You got Georgetown. Are you Georgetown? Do you like Georgetown?
Yes.
Okay, well, nobody's perfect. Okay, so great school. All right. So if you 6 months ago, Georgetown, you love Georgetown, and now you're a senior, and now you're looking at early action, early decision. And 6 months ago, a year ago, you knew you wanted to go there. So you apply early action, early decision, you get in, great. Okay? You visit Kentucky, you go down to Lexington, and you decide, I love it here, this is a great trip, I'm going to apply early action. 6 months ago, that was never a thought in your mind. Okay, you sit down now, thank you. So that was never a thought in your mind. Okay? 6 months from now, that early action, early decision may have waned, it may have faded. And you may not have, while you may have been admitted, and some of that may be binding, you can speak to this a little better than I can, but some of this may be binding, but if you are admitted to Kentucky, and now all of a sudden it's March and April, and you're thinking, oh, maybe I made the wrong decision here. Okay, that you don't want to get into that. This is stressful enough. Okay, you don't want to put yourself into that situation. However, if you have a school like Smith, again, please refute anything I just said, because this is good for them to hear. If you're 100% sure and your family is on board with this and everything just works out with financial aid, etc., go for it. Okay. If not, there's 3,000 schools to choose from. Okay. We're only 4 of them. Okay. Please understand. Okay.
I think the other thing that we're seeing, the trend is, oh, my friends are all applying early, so I'm going to apply early because I don't want to miss the boat, and everyone else is in this kind of rat race panic mode with applications. I also think that sometimes applying early is not appropriate for a student because what they're going to put forth is an inadequate application. It's not as strong as it could be if they waited until January academically, or maybe they didn't put enough time into their essay. You know, to rush and get it done just for the sake of getting it done can actually do a disservice to your child in the application, because they may not be putting something forward as strong as if they had just slowed down and done something kind of at the appropriate pace for them.
One other thing I'm going to add that's an overwhelming trend, even among the Division III schools for athletics, which is if any of you are talking to coaches because you plan to play a varsity sport in college, it's very likely that the coaches are going to encourage you strongly to apply early decision. And that's another complicated conversation. They're trying to put together teams, and sometimes athletes get a little bit of an advantage in the process. So that's a separate conversation that you ought to have in the college counseling office and really understand it. But the context there is different and it's changing.
Let's talk about financial aid just briefly. What was the role of financial aid in your admissions process, if any? And do you think there's any benefit to applying to, to being a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, financially speaking, for a student?
Well, I just go very quickly to say earlier that Smith meets full demonstrated need. That's an important thing. But we do, on the margins, take need into consideration. I think the big fish in the small pond question really speaks to those of you who maybe you're not interested in need, or may not qualify for a lot of need-based aid, but you're very interested in merit-based aid. And that's where the big fish in the small pond may come into consideration. And what you should be thinking about as a student and as a family is ensuring that you're going to go to a college that is challenging enough for you. Because the reason you're getting merit money is you're at the top of that pool. And if you've got that internal oomph and you're going to continue to challenge yourself, the faculty at those places are going to love you. But you really want to make sure that you're matching, you're a good match for that institution.
I'll just say that Westfield, we don't look at financial aid in the admission process. It is a need-blind process, so your admission decision is completely independent of what your family need is, estimated contribution, any of that information.
I'll second the point about big fish. I read a lot of transfer applications who we're trying to be big fish, and it doesn't always work out to a happy college experience.
At UConn, financial aid is not part of the admissions decision. I have seen in previous years, previous schools, where, depends on the time of year, where if a school is looking to fill maybe 10 more spaces in their class, this is where enrollment management, you'll hear that term all year, enrollment management will come into play, where the dean or the vice president of enrollment management will look at how many applications do we have left and can we fill 10 more spaces. And this could be in March or April. And they're trying to fill their class to increase their revenue and maintain their budgets, et cetera. And at that point, absolutely, financial aid will become a factor for some of these institutions, and they will look at your FAFSA and at the higher levels than the admissions office, but they will look at all the paperwork and then crunch the numbers and say, okay, what is the demonstrated need for this student? And if there's no need and this student has demonstrated that they want to attend a specific school, yeah, they'll go ahead and admit them. And banking on the fact that, okay, the family can afford to send the student here, it's a win-win for them. Okay, this doesn't happen with our schools per se, but well, Mark, it's kind of different than what Audrey was saying, but you may encounter that further on down the road in April and in March. Okay.
So 2 final thought kind of questions. What advice can you offer to the parents in the room in terms of their role in the admissions process?
I have a pet peeve myself that I'll share. When you visit campus with your student, acknowledge your student's presence in a conversation. It's a very awkward conversation to have you telling me about your student in the third person when your student's standing right there. Ask questions that are your own questions. Don't put them in your child's mouth. So if you want to know about our theater program, go ahead and ask about our theater program, but you don't need to say, Sally here is really interested in theater. Let me give you a summary of her theater experience. And that's why she was wondering about the theater program. Sally's right there. That's true. Sally, go ahead and ask the question. As a parent, you're allowed to have those questions. You don't need them to be your students' questions, to make them valid questions, but it can get to be an awkward situation having that type of conversation.
There may be some opportunities in your college visits for the students to participate in what's called a personal interview, or the interview. And that's an opportunity for the student to go meet one-on-one with an admissions representative. Parent, from my perspective of having traveled just to do interviews, we used to bring back those notes on the student based on the interview and put that in the application. Okay? Parents are out in the waiting room, students are in with the admissions officer. Depending upon the admissions officer, they'll make the student feel very at peace, comfortable, or they'll ask them, why is the sky blue? Okay? It can be a range of questions that the students are asked, but 99% of the time, the students are being asked about their experience, their school, who they are. Okay, let them do that on their own. Okay, go. You can freak out in the waiting room all you want, but it's for the students to participate in. And it's a great way just to kind of let go and say, okay, go get them. Good luck. And I would highly encourage students, if you have the opportunity, even if it's a school that you're not necessarily interested in, to get that experience as part of this admissions roller coaster process that you are now on. Okay, and one final thing I'll say before I pass the mic is, speaking of the roller coaster, visiting colleges is the hardest part of this. Actually making time, getting in the car, and doing the tours, doing the info sessions. After a while, all these schools start to look the same, and you hear the same things repeated. We have 14-to-1 student-teacher ratio, and we have X number of thousands of students, we have this number of majors. Getting out and seeing the campuses is the hardest part. It's also the most important part. Okay, and we encourage you to go. Just because you send in the application, and it could be October, doesn't mean you necessarily have to stop visiting colleges. Okay, if you get into the one that you are happy with and the family's all good to go with it, then that's great. Okay, but just because we will all have open house programs in March and April. Okay, for the mostly for the admitted students, but it's just because you send in the application doesn't mean you can't stop visiting schools. Okay, and whatever schools that you are most comfortable with on the campus are the ones that you're going to be more drawn to. Sorry for taking so long.
So parents definitely want to have a role in this, but it's more the facilitator role. So you want to make sure that you're on top of your student with their application, but you don't want to fill the application out for them. You want to make sure that they've written their essay and gotten their letters of recommendations, but you don't want to be calling the teachers and telling them what to write, or writing the essay for the students. So it's kind of walking that line. You want to make sure that they are doing the majority of the work, but at the same time, you want to be there to kind of give the kick in the pants if they need it. So that's really the role you want to take. You also want to take the role of, let's have a discussion about some of the schools that you're looking at. So if you're looking at schools that are going to be out of your price range, you may want to have that conversation early with the student, so maybe it gets crossed off the list and you don't have to have that conversation in April when you know you can't afford it and now there's kind of infighting at the dinner table or anything like that. So having those conversations early and often and maybe kind of mapping out a game plan is probably the best thing to do. You also don't want to kind of be dragging them along through the process too. I would love to have all of you apply to Westfield State University and all of you be accepted to Westfield and all of you come to Westfield. But I know that necessarily Westfield's not the best school for all of you for whatever reasons. Maybe you're not looking at the majors, maybe it's just not the location. So don't feel like you have to make them apply to Westfield and you have to make them come to campus and you make them come for the first year, because it might not end well. So really have that conversation about what is best for you and as a family unit, what's best for the student, and then set up a game plan and make sure that you kind of stay on the periphery and make sure they're engaged through the process.
Sort of restating that and the game plan, really good advice. Acknowledge, discuss openly all of the constraints and the obstacles now so that everybody understands that. And then the student can be in the driver's seat in the entire application process. So you're the facilitator or coach. And if the student isn't doing it at all, maybe it's time for a gap year. Maybe the student isn't ready for college. And that's something to think very carefully about, because this is a significant investment. If the student isn't ready to take full advantage of it, it's not a good investment.
Last question. This is a stressful time for our seniors. It's also a very exciting time. What advice do you have to them to kind of keep the mania level down and really take full advantage of the fun exploration, piece of this, and the idea that they're really choosing kind of the journey that they're going to go on? How do you kind of help them keep that in perspective with some final sage words of wisdom?
I'm going to cheat and just tell my story on Mr. Anderson. No, it really, I think this is about really thinking about what you want. It's about taking the time to look inward rather than outward, because there's so many expectations on this process. But I think one of the things that happens is we get wrapped up into it and start thinking, there's only one right college for me. I have to find that one right college. Meanwhile, you still feel like you have to apply to 15 of them. So really keep your mind open. And the story that these guys have heard before is, I know you're going to think I'm absolutely nuts, but I have been happily married to Mr. Anderson for 33 years.
What?
Still, I gotta believe there are at least 5 other guys in America that I could have been happily married to.
No way.
It happens.
I would say, just take your time. Really, it's okay to, check out for a little bit and watch Netflix or Hulu or HBO Go or anything like that. Don't necessarily binge watch a series in the entire weekend, but at the same time, make sure you do take some time for yourself and really enjoy this, because it is a fun process. It is fun to kind of figure out where you're going to go for the next 4 years and what you're going to be doing. So, take some time to enjoy the process and really don't feel like you have to get everything done and stress yourself out. If you feel like you need to take a break, it's okay to take a quick break. Again, don't binge watch the series, but I recommend Ozark if anyone hasn't watched it at this point. So, and as a kind of a corny thing, just keep this in mind. You're applying to these colleges. You're not an applicant. You're an applicant. All right.
That's a new one, Mr.
There you go. I like puns.
I'm going to politely dissent from that. I don't think it's all that fun a process. Actually, I think it's often a horrible process. My advice is don't confuse applying to college with going to college. In the dark days of December, you may come to a place where you say, I don't even want to go. I'm not excited about these schools. But remember that going to school is nothing like applying to a school.
I don't know if I can add anything this year to that. Yeah.
Your roller coaster analogy
Oh,
was particularly
try not to go there.
spirited
Try
in
not to
previous
go there.
years.
This is a roller coaster, yeah. I won't get into the details of that, but you're on the roller coaster, and there's going to be loops, there's going to be twists and turns, and getting to those campuses is not easy. And filling out the same application, even the common application, it's boring, it's redundant. Are they going to like my essay? Everybody in my house loves me. They say they do. Everybody, my teachers like me. There's 2 or 3 people that wrote great things about me. Why wouldn't the people reading it love me and want me and give me a full ride? That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I would love to see that once, 3 times for me. I would love that. It's not going to happen. You need to have some diversity in the schools that you're looking at. You don't necessarily have to have it in the major per se, but small schools, large schools, state, public, private, far away, close by, 4-year schools, 2-year schools. You have to have some diversity in what you're looking at, and that takes time to develop. And one trick I would say, I usually talk about tricks, but I would say put together, if you haven't done this yet, put together an Excel spreadsheet for yourself, for your parents. Let's see if the students actually do this. Listing the schools, could be 3, could be 10, whatever. And then that's one column, and then going across could be, do they have the major? How far away is it? How much does it cost? What are the forms that are required for financial aid? How many teacher recommendations do they require? Whatever you can come up with, going across, and then start to plot it, and fill in that information. That way when Halloween, Thanksgiving, now it's Christmas, New Year, and now you're thinking, oh boy, in 9 months, we're going to have our child on a college campus, and where's this going to be? And it's the unknown, that's the hard part. Okay, but preparing yourself and plotting in that information for yourself, it starts to bring down the stress of not knowing. There's a lot of great students in here, and they're going to do some amazing things. It's going to be awesome to see, but we just don't know where they're going to end up yet, but we will.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a few minutes for some questions. If there are any, I would love to see the seniors in the room ask questions as opposed to the parents, but of course, parent questions are always welcome. Do any of my brave seniors have a question? Oh, my friend. Let me bring the mic to you. This is your moment in the sun. It's your moment in the sun.
All right. So my question was, can I apply like 2 different essays to a school if I wanted to say have one essay to one school and one essay to another school?
So if you're using the common application or the coalition application, there will be a single essay on that. Some schools actually require a second one or have a supplemental question, so it's going to depend on the school. And if schools are not on the common application or have different application forms, then you've got a lot more flexibility. And maybe, if you feel like there's an essay that's really relevant to a particular school, you should ask if they'll take a supplemental essay, whether or not required. And they'll tell you the truth and take their advice.
Any other senior questions? All right. Names are so congratulatory. I love one about
So I've heard people say different things about how the essay should be written, like super formal or as if someone was talking. And I wanted to get your idea of like what the level of voicing should be.
The level of formality. Good question. Yep.
The level of formality of an essay, what do you think? Informal? Formal?
I think it depends a lot on the school you're applying to. If you're applying to a school that has a culture of informality, like Clark, for example, certainly informal essays are welcome. You are sometimes in a bind if you are using the same essay for multiple schools, and in that case, that would be a very good example of a time to ask whether they might accept an additional essay that's more in the voice of the school. And Clark does have the supplement.
The other thing is it's going to depend on the topic of the essay. So there, you usually have about 5 questions that you have a choice to answer. And some of the topic that you choose may inform how you answer that question and may demand a more formal or informal, or, you know, I've even seen some poetry. It doesn't always work that well. And remember, you don't know who's reading it. So you want to reflect yourself, but you've got to make sure that whoever's reading it is going to be able to understand who you are.
I would also add, if you know what school you're looking to apply to and you've been there, you can get a feel for the vibe and the pace of the school and the population. And meeting with the admissions office and how they interact with you can give you a better sense of which essay should I use.
Any other questions? Parents, seniors, anybody? The question is about the interview. Is it required of every applicant? When does it kind of come in the process? After you've been accepted, before you've been accepted, when you're applying?
So in my experience, it was optional to do the interview. If you did, obviously it shows some sort of demonstrated interest, and we would take those notes and we would add them to the application. However, most students will not interview. Even at a school where we would do that. With my current school, we would not add the notes of an interview to an application. So it really depends on the school.
Yes, Clark offers interviews, and I strongly encourage encourage them. I would say, unless you're going to say something really offensive, an interview can't hurt you. And we're only human, so in terms of at the admissions process going forward, the people we've actually met feel more real and we're on their side. So I would definitely recommend an interview, even if it's not required.
And the counselors can do mock interviews with your seniors. We've done that a lot where, they're kind of sitting down, we're asking them questions, we're kind of preparing them for that process to make it a little less anxiety producing. So if we can certainly help with that.
Seeing part relief. One thing that's flashed, for some applicants to some schools, we didn't really touch on this, but if they're applying to, let's say, a fine arts or art program, there is the component, at least at our school and all of them that I've worked at, where there's an audition that's required, and that is part of the application process, or a portfolio review for digital media design or art, illustration, etc. For those students out there that are looking to actually major in that or attempting to major in that, you may be asked to provide a portfolio or come to campus and complete an audition. That's part of the application process. And they are strict. They are brutally honest. I one time saw, honest to God, a straight A student walk out of an audition bawling. And they told her that right then and there she was not, they drove 8 hours to be there. And the faculty told her that she would not be admitted into their, I think it was musical theater program. It was brutal. But that's how, it's not going to happen to anybody in here, but that's, some schools will do that, okay? Not necessarily for an art portfolio, because a lot of that can be submitted through Slide Room, and which is a site where students can submit their portfolios online and send it directly to art departments. And again, every campus is different, but that can be part of that Excel grid I was referring to earlier. That's a major that the students are looking for.
Any final questions? Oh.
Some schools have like a priority deadline for like honors consideration or scholarship consideration. That's where I'm struggling to kind of figure out when I should apply. I'm not make an early decision, but if it's better to apply earlier or to get honors, and what are your thoughts on that?
The question was about applying early to get specific financial consideration or get into an honors college. I think it's different for every school. I don't think there's a way that anyone could answer kind of that question.
Every school's clear in their instructions, though.
Yes. Correct. And on the websites are sometimes very cumbersome and kind of confusing to kind of navigate. It is a little bit of a kind of, you have to decipher things a lot, and you have to put a lot of effort into it. But the answers are there, and if you can't find them easily, you can always call admissions, and they will happily give you the information that you can't find on the website easily. Last question, I think.
If the student has a particular field of study that they want to go into, is there any benefit to going and speaking with the department that they want to get into, and how does that work?
The question is, if a student is interested in a particular field of study, is it to their benefit to speak with the department head or the department chair or folks in the department at the college while you're visiting to get more information and learn more about that program?
Yeah, and would that help?
And does it help with admissions?
So the question, the answer is it depends. Some universities you actually apply to a particular program, but speaking for liberal arts colleges, we're not admitting into a program. However, I will tell you that sometimes I hear from a faculty member that a student was in their classroom as a visitor, and they had a great conversation, and they just put that little note, which then goes into the file. It's not going to get a weak student in, and basically, on the other hand, if you didn't impress the faculty member, we're just not going to hear from them. So it's another one of those, other than if you actually behave outlandishly in the classroom. It's highly unlikely to hurt, but it might help. And here's where it's going to help even more. You're going to understand what the academic climate is like in the department that you're most interested in. So rather, I think too often we're thinking about what's going to help me get in for admission, when the more important thing is, where is the school where I will flourish as a student? And visiting those departments and doing that research is going to help you answer that question.
And I think that's a great point to land on and end with, is that fit is really the most important thing. What school might be a perfect choice for someone may be the absolute wrong choice for somebody else who's, and again, academic success, okay, that's important, but this is 4 years of your life. You want to be happy, you want to be fulfilled, you want to thrive academically and otherwise. And I think it's important to kind of approach this, as we keep saying, holistically, and not just think about, where's the most competitive school I can get into, because that may not necessarily where you're going to be the happiest and most fulfilled, and will kind of get you to that next step in your journey in life. So on that note, I really want to thank everyone for coming out, and I especially want to thank these 4 wonderful folks for spending their evening with us. Can we give them a warm round of applause?